Okay, Terrence, appreciate it. So there's this very disturbing video that has gone viral, and it highlights the threat from within our own country. There's a protest in Dearborn, Michigan. Oh, we know all about Dearborn. It featured anti-American and anti-Israel chants.
Any system that would allow such atrocities and such devilry to happen and would support it, such a system does not deserve to exist on God's earth. Malcolm X said, and I quote, "We live in one of the rottenest countries that has ever existed on this earth."
Clearly the anti-MAGA crowd in all caps. These are the voters, by the way, in a state that Joe Biden has to win. So Joe Biden is turning his back on Israel in order to hold on to power. That's really what this comes down to. And it's not just Joe Biden. The Democrat Party really falling in line, turning on Israel, doing whatever they can to appease the radicals in their party who are calling for death to America and death to Israel. Well, joining us now is Arizona congressional candidate, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, thanks for being here on the show. You know, you've been warning about the enemy within for a very long time, but they are really now revealing themselves. It's all very much out in the open. It's like they're proud of it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you're right. We've been talking about this since 9/11. I've testified to Congress many times about it and repeatedly tried to say, listen, this is a group that's been radicalizing our community. They certainly don't speak the majority, but there has not been a potent movement to counter them within the Muslim community. And that's why we have our Muslim reform movement. But that template for radicalization, as you noticed in the clip you showed, he quoted Malcolm X. The BLM movement was about violence, about nihilism, destroying America's foundation. So now you see peri-pandemic and post-pandemic with the new Democratic Party more radical than it's ever been. It is being radicalized by the nihilists and the extreme Islamists. The Ilhan Omars, Rashida Tlaibs of Congress are working with the AOCs and Bernie Sanders of Congress to radicalize and move the party even further to the extreme from where the American center is. And that's how radicalization works in the UN, where you have Iran working with China, working with Venezuela against America and against Israel. So therefore, it's time, you know, when President Biden doesn't even say anything and the Biden administration sits silent, they allow this radicalization to happen. No different than Muslims who sit silent and don't counter political Islam, and these global movements also allow the anti-Semitism and the anti-Westernism to flourish within our communities.
Doctor, I have a question in my prompter, but I'm going to skip that because I'm going to ask you some of the questions. One of the questions that is often communicated almost in a whisper when people talk about Islam in our country. Because I really am curious, and I've never had a chance, frankly, to talk to someone as educated as yourself. I've read your work. I'm familiar. You sound very logical, but a lot of times I think when folks see their Western culture deteriorating and they read about the Quran and Islam in general, they have questions. And one of the questions I hear repeated frequently is Islamic culture, will it work? Will it vibe? Is it compatible with Western culture? So I want to ask you that first. But secondly, the other thing that I hear very often repeated, and I want to give you a chance to answer, is with the advent of the Quran stating that the infidels should be killed so many times, are the people who are repeating this rhetoric, are they radicals or are they just simply Islamic?
That's a great question, and thanks for asking me. You know, there's no doubt for any Muslims that are honest and genuine and straightforward will admit that normative Islam today is dominated by petro-Islam, by the Islamists of the Muslim Brotherhood, the radical, the militants that produce the Hamases, the Iranian Khomeinists, the Pakistani Jamaat Islamiyah. There's the dominant movement that dominates the publishing houses and the media arms, etc., that is supremacist, that is pre-modern. But Islam is 1,445 years old, so it hasn't gone through that enlightenment. And just as the West went through multiple revolutions that ultimately created the greatest country in the world after 1,789 years, and we had a constitution that rendered unto God's what is God and unto unto man what is man's. You know, this is what Islam has not gone through. So if you look at the polls, for example, in the Palestinians and Middle East, 44% support the decimation, the destruction of Hamas. Now, that's not a majority. So yes, I'm very concerned when you're talking about a faith of 1.7 billion people, a quarter of the people in the world. You know, this is why my website, z4az.com, has an 8-point border plan. We need to seal our border. We need to have vetting of people coming in that believe in the American social contract, that believe in American law first, and no, theocratic law and just our personal pietistic faith. But people like my parents escaped that militancy, escaped that theocracy to come to be able to practice a reformed Islam. But you're right, the Quran in the translation my father taught me was one that is compatible with America. But that's a small minority translation that has yet to get any traction globally within the Muslim community.
I've been listening to you very closely, and one of the things that strikes me is that you say fighting back against radical Islam factions here in the United States is incumbent on other Muslims in this country. So do you see a disconnect right now within the American Muslim community? And how do some of these, or is there an issue of backbone, if you will, from some of these other Muslim groups who are reticent, if you will, to fight back against the more radical and extreme factions of American Islam?
There's a massive disconnect, but just as in the time of World War II with the Germans, the silent Germans were complicit. And within the Muslim community, we have a responsibility as we live in the greatest, freest country in the world to push back against theocratic Islam, against these militants, and not only condemn them, but to root them out and to expose them as the bigots, the anti-Semites, the hypocrites that they are by living here in the West. It's time that we begin a reform movement to go on the offense and not on the defense. And that's why our Muslim reform movement that includes leaders like Rahil Raza, Ezra Nomani, Soraya Dean, and so many of those. If people can look at our website at muslimreformmovement.org, we formed a global coalition in the West that is anti-jihad that includes people like myself at claritycoalition.org. There are many Muslims trying to get some bandwidth, but these radicals get the bandwidth because the Democrats the left allows them to basically gaslight us into paying attention to them. And it's time for Muslims, especially, a non-Muslim can't root this out. We're the only ones that can take back the ownership of our faith and say, you know what, as we finish our holy month of fasting, we're going to condemn these folks as the worst of the worst in humanity and stand by Israel and stand by their just war and say, if really you want to save the Palestinians, Hamas needs to lay down their weapons and release the hostages and surrender to the Israeli legal system.
Well, Dr. Jasser, so insightful. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.